I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. I've been wanting to talk with you. I've read your incredible book, Likeable Badass, and I know there's so much that we have to talk about today in a short period of time. But I wanted to just ask you, they heard the introduction about you, but I want you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how did you get to do what you're doing today?
For sure. So I do not remember at this stage of my life if I ever had a childhood dream when it came to what I was going to be when I grow up. But I can promise you, if I ever did, it wasn't this. Okay. To be an organizational psychologist, a professor who uses behavioral science to try to help women live their best lives. I absolutely love this, but it was not part of a lifelong plan. I
You probably
essentially
didn't even
took
know that existed or what that was.
well, for sure. I mean, I was a management consultant. That was my
Right.
first like business career. And it was only when I was in consulting, both fascinated and frustrated with the people I was working with, that I started to think about these things that are in psychology about how do you influence people? How do you motivate them? How do you negotiate with them? And so that led me to what I study. But even then, I wasn't talking about using these tools to help women advance. I still talk about psychology to help everybody. But I realized in the conversations where women would approach me after a class, a program, a session, and talk about a challenge they were having, advocating for themselves, being influential, getting people to take them seriously, getting people to respect their contributions or reward their contributions. And I thought, we have some science that can speak to this, and we aren't doing as good of a job as we should as a field getting this into the hands of people who can use it to live their best lives. And I had realized in that moment that I had this advantage because my day job was to be immersed in behavioral science, because that's what I do as a professor. And I was also using that science not just for my classroom teaching and for my own research, but I was also using that science to navigate my own life as a woman
Right.
in a career. And I thought, oh, wait, I've just been using all of that. I can help other people use it too. So it's just been a long and winding road that's brought me here. And then outside of that stuff, I've got three kids. I live in Chicago. All my kids are named after famous Chicago athletes. My youngest kid has been on a 3-year quest to get a dog. We've had 22 years of dogs and then a nice little break. And apparently, we're now going to be dog owners again. So, those are the things that keep me busy when I'm not doing my professor stuff.
So I love it. So, it's like, yes, there is a life behind it, just like everybody else who's listening to this. The reality of the person behind you. It's interesting when you say, there's all this science out there. One of the things that I really appreciate about you and also even your book, is that you also make it accessible. Because I too, I'm in the academic world as well, and a lot of these things are not accessible in terms of the way journal articles are written, et cetera. And so you have taken that, but you've also made it accessible for people to consume and also to practice in their lives. So Likeable Badass, talk to us. What was that? Well, where did you get that title and what is your book about?
So I get asked a lot where the title came from, and I really want to have a story for everyone. Like there was this moment, and I was in a bar, and someone said something, and then I said, "And la, likable badass." But it just evolved over time. To your point of how do I explain the stuff I study, which is very human, to people who don't spend their lives studying this kind of stuff. And so, likable badass was a pretty good descriptor. So what it means is one of the areas that I've studied for a long time is what psychologists will call status, and I think everyone should call it status. And status is how much we're respected and regarded by other people. So we talk about somebody as being a high status person, we're conveying a level of respect and admiration for who that person is. That's what I study. Well, that's a judgment that we make in our minds. I decide how much I respect you or anyone else. You decide how much you respect me. And so, how does that judgment happen? That's what psychologists study. That's what I study. It turns out those judgments aren't random, they're based on predictable stuff and specifically two dimensions. When we look at another person and we're trying to figure out, like, who is this person about and do I value them? Do I respect them? We're looking at two things. One, what are your intentions toward me? Are you going to be helpful to me? Or perhaps you're going to be hurtful because you're going to be self interested. You're going to be competitive. That idea of are you friend or are you foe is so critical to our survival that we can pick it up in a fraction of a second. We want people who are other oriented, warm, caring. I use on the book cover, I use the term likable, but it's capturing that idea of you are not just out for yourself. You're going to make other people's lives better. The second thing we pay attention to is, well, can I rely on you? Are you good at anything, what you do? If I'm gonna, should I trust your judgment, your advice? If I give you a task, will it be returned to me well? That's the second thing I care about. And in psychology, we're gonna call that somebody's competence or their assertiveness. They can control their environment. But on the cover of the book, I call it badass. So the idea is likable badass is showing up in a way that convinces your audience of the two most important things you need them to believe: that you care about people other than yourself and you have value to contribute.
Mhm.
And when people believe those two things about you, respect comes, right? Everybody that you would say, I respect this person, I guarantee you those two things are true.
About some people may be listening and saying, "Oh, well, that's all about faking it, or trying to impress somebody, or be a certain way, or I need to be my." I always hear this. I need to be my authentic self, and I can't worry about impressing people. What would you say to them?
What I always say to people is authentic and strategic are not opposites. You
Yeah.
absolutely can and should be both. And what so we are strategic all the time. So if let's say you come into work and you've had a terrible morning, right? You spill your coffee, there's an accident, your kid is yelling, whatever. But you go into a client meeting and you smile and you say, "Hey, how are you? I hope you're having a great day." And they say, "How are you doing?" You say, I'm doing okay." Because you're now, is that a lie? Is that inauthentic? You had a terrible morning, but you might also say, well, this is not the moment that
Right.
I need to tell that whole story. Why? Because this impression of what the goal that I'm trying to achieve here is about something different. And so I always say we all have multiple truths, multiple authenticities that exist at any given time. What you should never do is have to pretend to be something you're not, use a strategy you hate, etc. You don't need to do that because the idea is if you don't care about anyone and you're not good at anything, I cannot help you. But I'm going to presume that everybody I talk to meets those two criteria. You care and you have some skills in some domain. Well, then that's your authentic self. All you need to figure out is how to let the other person see it. So when we think about whether it's communicating with your kids or your boss or your clients, you're saying, I have value to offer, and I'm going to think intentionally about how to show you that.
Right.
And so I think it's about strategy and authenticity come together with intention. It's not faking, but at the same time, there are very few domains where we go about just saying, I just do what I want, I don't care. And never does that yield good results.
Right.
That's how I think about it. Yes, I am 100% a believer of authenticity. You're not faking things, you're not being insincere, but we are more complicated than a single comment, a single truth at any given time. We have multiple authentic selves, and showing what part of myself I'm going to let you see at this moment can be intentional.
Yeah.
And it can be intentional given the goals that I have for this relationship, how I help you, how I help me, etc.
Yeah. You mentioned this notice of status, and you also mentioned in your book that women have a status problem. Talk more about that.
Yeah, so when we look at gender as one variable of many, all other things being equal, a woman enters the situation, a man enters the exact same situation. People's brains will assign more respect and regard to the man from the outset than they will the woman. So that's a status problem. What it means is there's a starting line. If there's a starting line of status, we are not starting at the same space. We're starting several steps back because people ascribe more respect to one category than another. That's not just true for gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, accent, appearance. You can name all kinds of characteristics where we have decided to respect one group more than another, if only in our non-conscious brains.
Right.
So
Well, and
that's what it means
especially in a leadership role, right? I mean,
for
because
sure.
leadership has been traditionally male.
Absolutely. So there's
Yeah.
situations where somebody is certainly systemically excluded and therefore numerically quite rare. then it only contributes to the schema or the stereotype that status is associated with, in this case,
Yeah,
men. So that's what I
absolutely.
mean by having a status problem, is that women have at least one variable they do not control that is not associated with the highest status, associated with lower status. Now, the good part that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And I think we will all see this because we can all name countless women in our lives we would say are highly respected, not just by us, but people, everyone who knows them, is that when we look at the science, um, how you show up in an interaction is a much bigger predictor of how much someone will respect you than any of these ascribed characteristics like gender. So it's very fixable, but I would say if you don't start with a lot of advantage, then you can't be careless about how
Right.
people see it. That's where intention is particularly important for the people, which includes women, who did not get born into status privilege. So you can absolutely be respected, but you need to understand how respect works so that you're not unintentionally doing stuff that's setting you back.
Yeah. And what are some of those things that would set you back?
So when someone says to you, stop apologizing, right? Stop downplaying your accomplishments, et cetera. That kind of stuff. Stop using tentative language. You're like, I'm just keep getting lectured on the fact that I should be doing different things. But it all relates to that idea of being caring and being competent. So certain behaviors, if you're constantly apologizing for things, you might be creating the impression that you made a mistake.
Right.
And when we commit to making a lot of mistakes, people won't see us as capable.
Right.
So that badass component could be downplayed. But like self-deprecating, when you intentionally will volunteer for no reason something unflattering or negative about yourself, oftentimes out of a sense of humor, to make other people feel comfortable, to try to make yourself seem humble. I'm a lifelong self-deprecator, but one of the things we see from the science is that people are considered experts on themselves. So for the most part, people believe what you say about yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why self-promotion works as well as it does. If you say you're great at something or something's gone well, people are like, I don't have any reason to think different. But if you say you're
And
not
we
good at
see
something,
that. We see that everywhere, right? In the media, we see that everywhere.
but like the whole idea that you may not be as conscious of it as you think, and I'll use myself as an example. So I can say to you, cutting yourself down is bad. And you're like, okay, yeah, I get that, Allison. And then I say, well, how often did you do it yesterday? I don't know, 0, 5. I'm not really sure because you're not always consciously aware of it. I had this interesting experience in writing this book that made me aware of how much I was doing it. I I sell the book before I write it. So I sell the proposal. I have an editor who buys the book and wants me to write it, but she's a stranger at the point she buys the book. She's met me one time on Zoom. I then turn in this whole manuscript to her for her feedback. She's still essentially a stranger, even though time has gone by. And the biggest piece of feedback that comes back from my editor after when I turn in the whole book is, oh my goodness, you are cutting yourself down throughout this entire book.
Oh my
You
God.
need to stop. You're an expert. Even my dedication page, the first page you come to when someone thanks whoever they want to thank in their life, she nixed it. She said it's too self-deprecating. You cannot put that version of yourself on page 2 of the book. And I thought, don't I get to say whatever I want on my dedication page? Like that's the one page no one edits. You get to just dedicate it in however way you want. Nope, not this way. I already understood that self-deprecating was why it was problematic. I knew I did it, but thought I had checked it quite a bit.
Right.
If I hadn't written a book where everything was on a page and you could point to it and be like, see, here it is, Allison, I would not have as much awareness of how much I was still doing that. So there are moments where if I say to you, how many cups of coffee did you have yesterday? Most people, right? You could probably
Right.
give me an accurate answer within a cup. But if I say, how many times did you dismiss a compliment? How many times did you cut yourself down? How many times did you fail to share a success, which is also a bad thing to do? You may not have any idea. Like I didn't have any idea because our storytelling's on autopilot. And that's where sometimes, I say there's a lot of things that happen to us that are not our fault, we do not deserve, but you don't want to be adding to it by unintentionally doing what I was doing. Like how many years in how many audiences had I walked around cutting myself down and not even fully being conscious of it in the way that I became when my editor pointed it out.
Oh, it's what I mean, that is such a great story because it really, I mean, I think we're doing it all the time. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I do that. I do that all the time. And um, it is unconscious. You don't even realize you're doing it because I don't know if there's something about humility with this or that we think we need to be humble or what it is.
That's right. And but what so one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do, and this the psychologist in me has gotten a lot better at doing this, is when I have a tendency to want to do something, I try to think, why do I want to do that? So let's say I want to say something self-deprecating about myself. I'll pause and I'll think, what are you trying to achieve by doing that, Allison?
Mm,
And is there another way? So, having spent a lot of time thinking about this particular behavior, I realized there's two things. One, I pride myself on being really funny. I think I'm hilarious. Most people do too. Self deprecating is a form of humor. So,
right,
sometimes I'm going for a laugh. And so that's a goal. And then the other thing is, it is extremely important to me that people feel comfortable interacting with me and that they feel like I am modest and humble. And there's something about
right,
it when you're a professor, like people get a little bit like you're not going to be a normal person to talk
right,
to. And it's very
right.
important to me to disarm that. So I started to realize that I'm using a behavior with two very valid goals in mind. However, that same behavior has some other negative consequences. And so then back to being authentic and strategic, what else could I do
Right.
that would be humorous and disarming? Building other people up, being complimentary, all of those things. I'm like, I can disarm in lots of different ways. I can be funny in ways that aren't always about knocking myself down. I can do all kinds of things. So that is, as I start, what I encourage everybody to do when you have a tendency, you have that tendency because you're trying to achieve an objective.
Yeah.
And if it's not working for you, it might be worth thinking how you could keep the same instinct, but do it in a different way. So when you feel those compliments, right, from people you've coached and you kind of want to bat them down, it's a humility, right?
Right.
It's not wanting just basically wanting to be
Boastful.
humble and
Right.
warm. Yeah, not wanting to be boastful. And you real when you're all but you start to realize your words were so meaningful to me. Thank you for taking the time to share them. I don't often get
Exactly.
feedback like this. It makes me better and you have absolutely lifted my spirits all day. No part of that sounds boastful,
Right.
right? But
Exactly.
you're also acknowledging the gift that somebody gave you who took a lot of time to write that and
Mhm.
wanted to give you this gift and to say, I accept it. And all that said, back to authenticity, like there are things that internally for me, like accepting compliments, still don't feel comfortable. And I don't have to let how uncomfortable I might feel be the thing that shows.
Right.
I can simply say, I can hold two truths. Yes, that feels uncomfortable, and I'm going to receive it with grace.
What have you learned in the past 5 years, just writing this book and, all the research you've been doing? I mean, you've been doing that a lot longer, but you just over the past 5 years that you wish you had known when you were starting out as a woman leader, and just in your life.
Yeah, well, I'll answer it a slightly different way, and that is that I was benefited by some really great advice when I was pretty young that helped me tremendously. And I think other people who didn't get that advice as early as I did, I saw them struggle more. And that is that relationships are one of the most important currencies that we have, right? Giving to them and getting from them. And that you have to invest in your relationships from the get go. A lot of people think they have nothing to give in a relationship. I got to prove myself first. So now I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to generate some massive, amazing output, and then have something to give. And I always say that's not true at all. Everybody has something. Everybody has something to give. I'll just give you a very silly case in point. Anytime something goes wrong with my technology, I just hand it to one of my kids. My oldest child is 15. My youngest is 9. Between the three of them, I'm like, solve my problem. Okay. And they can, whatever problem it is, I guarantee you they can solve it in 10 seconds. So everybody knows something that other people don't know. So thinking about how you can use that to add value to your relationships from the first second is to me the thing that has been most advantageous in my career and the thing that I wish I could scream into everybody's ear if I got them at the very beginning of their adult professional life.
Wow. Love it. All right. What's an inspirational quote? Or
Mm.
do you have something that you can leave us with that we can think about as we close
Okay.
off the air today with all the,
Yes. Okay. I've got one for you.
yeah.
It's Jill Churchill. There's no way to be a perfect mother and a million ways to be a good one. I really that gives me peace as a mother who has a career. But more than anything, I think you can take that word mother out and replace it with leader, negotiator, woman, whatever you want. There is no one way. There is no one way to be a perfect anything, even a perfect likable badass. There
Wow.
are a million ways to be a good one. And I think when we start to embrace that in everything we do, whether it's parenting, leading, friendship, whatever it is, we will be able to do this thing where we can show up, right, with more authenticity and more intention. So it gives me a lot of peace. There's no way to be a perfect mother and a million ways to be a good one.
Wow. Allison, you have left us with some really incredible food for thought here. I think, um, I don't know. I'm just thrilled that I got the chance to talk to you. I knew I would love talking with you. I know everyone's going to love this episode. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. I mean, it's been incredible. What I love about you and what you offer is so much wisdom with so much practical advice with it. So thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.